Good morning, John. How are you doing?
Hey, good morning, John. How are you, sir?
Doing great. Can you believe it's episode 13, right? Oh, my goodness.
Episode 13, and it's a great topic today because healthcare is in the news everywhere. So it's going to be a great show today. I'm really excited about it.
I think so, too. And if you think about it, so just, what's happened over the last 18 to 24 months with respect to COVID, I mean, there's no industry that has been most impacted, right? And probably one of the most important industries as we've gone through this. I know we're not over with it yet, but still, I mean, they have been front and center, literally and figuratively, right?
Yeah, I think what we'll learn today, and I'm excited about our guests, is that we'll learn today is the acceleration of technology and digital disruption in healthcare that maybe would have been 3 to 5 years away happened in literally 12 to 24 months. Absolutely incredible.
Exactly.
So
well, hey, let's bring on our guests. So we'd like to welcome Bob Krohn and Ron Exler, both from ISG. Bob is the partner over our healthcare vertical, and Ron is a principal analyst and consultant for ISG. Welcome aboard, and good morning, folks.
Good morning.
Good morning.
How are y'all doing?
Good morning, everybody. Hey, Bob, listen, first of all, sympathy to you and Notre Dame for the big loss this past week, so I apologize.
We can't win them all. And we think you had something to do with the loss.
That's right.
Well,
so good.
I'm obviously happy. Today. I'm obviously happy with the Dodgers.
I see that. I see how you hung that up there, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
Big Ron, hey, we were just that late.
Well, we were just chatting right before you guys joined about how healthcare has certainly been literally and figuratively front and center over the last 18 to 24 months. And it's sort of an interesting time, right? So we're in fall, we're at the end of the year. Everybody is planning for 2022 and what budgets are going to look like and strategies and things like that. So we thought it would be perfect timing to chat with you guys about trends that you all see in healthcare and disruption in the healthcare industry. And John had just mentioned as we started today's episode that, we believe that what's happened over the last 18 to 24 months has certainly catapulted every industry, including healthcare, forward by probably 6 or 7 years. So we wanted to get some of y'all's perspective, as we say here in Texas, on this really interesting industry. And our audience would love to hear lots of your insight.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we can start off with, too, is we just came out of the sourcing conference for ISG. I mean, over 270 people getting together in Dallas, over 70 ISG advisors, and then obviously over 200 people from the industry. And key trends were shared by Stanton Jones, who really, I wondered if any of this relates. These were 4 industry trends overall, but how, Bob, maybe, and Ron, these relate to what's happening specifically in healthcare.
Sure. Maybe I'll take the first shot at it, Ron, and then you can fill in what I missed. So first off, thanks to John and John for having us on the show today. We couldn't be more excited to be here. It's a little shameful that we're not in person because we can't see John Boccuzzi's complete blout fit, as the kids call him, blue from head to toe. But thinking a little bit on the industry trends, it's a pleasure to get to hear Stanton speak. So I did not have a preview of what he was going to say. So I was in the audience when Stanton presented, and I was like, boy, I sure hope these trends apply to healthcare, and each and every one is spot on. We can go into a lot of granularity on these, but just from a surface perspective, anything as a service. So infrastructure as a service is constantly talked about with our clients. You think about healthcare in a couple of different markets from the provider side of the house, healthcare, hospital chains and such. Infrastructure's typically been in-house with a couple notable exceptions. But now as they start to face more and more cost pressure, and trying to drive their application base a little bit differently, infrastructure is becoming a key component, and looking for infrastructure as a service is becoming critical for the provider side. Payers have sourced a lot in the past. People might not expect that, but they have, but it's primarily been on the application side. So now as they look toward cloud-based solutions, they're broadly defining infrastructure as a service as opportunities and starting to move forward. Ron, what are you seeing from the more from the research side?
Yeah, so we're actually in the middle right now of a ISG Provider Lens study. It's a market study for the healthcare industry and the service providers in that industry. And we've had conversations with about 25 different companies that are serving healthcare industry, and definitely these 4 points all do apply. We are seeing a lot of work in cloud migration. I mean, the healthcare industry is maybe a little behind some other industries in that area, but it's very much ramping up in terms of what the service providers are doing for the healthcare companies, both on the payer and provider side. So, and absolutely these others we can dive into, but the connected experiences, I mean, taking what you learn from other industries, including yours, John, in the travel and hospitality area. I mean, those connections with the consumers, they call them patients and members in the healthcare world. But those things are important to connect and engage the people to everything that needs to happen in the healthcare world.
Yeah, if I was,
I mean, was that, Bob? Does that relate to Does that relate to wearables? Like, so when you think about connected experiences in healthcare, how does that? Talk to us a little bit about that. That's interesting.
Sure, absolutely. I would say it does relate to wearables, and you think about where we were even 5 years ago from a wearable perspective. They were a nice thing to have. They were generally offline. No real data was being gathered from them. Today, that's not the case. Obviously, everything connects out and into applications and eventually into stored data. If we think about this looking forward 5 years, I can certainly envision us being in a world where you can do a little pinprick into your wrist and get a blood sample that comes into a wearable. So our clients are investing heavily in the connected experience. Wow. If I were to reword it, I would say around patient intimacy as opposed to connected experience to be more granular from a healthcare perspective, but it's all over the place from both the payers and the providers. You think about it from a payer perspective, their business is in identifying and keeping people healthy so that their premiums can be a little bit more reflective and they don't have to be punitive. They don't have to be so high. So that's the payer perspective, and providers are obviously trying to keep people healthy.
So all things digital, which is really interesting, right? So I wanted to make a comment you had made, Ron. You had talked about sort of some of the similarities, or I call it the cross-pollination between, for example, providers and maybe some folks in hospitality. And it's interesting because a couple of years ago, we actually pulled a workshop together, and it was a really unlikely workshop because we had hospitals there and we had hospitality folks there. And, everyone in hospitality knows their own industry. Everyone in the hospital industry knows their own industry, right? But they didn't know each other's industry. And what was really interesting is that cross-pollination that happened. And at the end of the day, a lot of it is about, yes, you have to be technically competent and have the right facilities and the right people doing the right things in the hospitals, right? But it all comes down to, in this case, patient care. And there is a difference in patient care. And it's interesting because lots of these companies now are actually advertising this stuff. When I was growing up, we went to the hospital. I didn't even know the name of the hospital. Now it's like you see ads on TV to pull you towards hospital ABC versus hospital F, G, and H or something like that, right?
Yeah. In the U.S. at least, there's competition in the healthcare space. So that's why you're seeing advertising and the digital engagement, these tools, the mobile access, making it easier is definitely a competitive advantage.
Oh, I think so too. So
John,
what's the difference? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah,
John,
you're bringing up a great point with the wearables and the cross-pollination. Scott Furlong, a partner at ISG, always talks about, whenever I'm with him, he talks about the Magic Band at Disney. And that technology came out years ago. And now I could see that totally relating to, healthcare providers and having a wearable from a standpoint of even, tracking, your health, but even being inside of a hospital and knowing where that patient is and then how a doctor can interact with them, et cetera. It gets really, really interesting. It relates to number 4, though, and I'd love to talk about that, which was cybersecurity. So now there's a tremendous amount of data about personal information, and now we've got to protect it. What kind of investments are firms making in cybersecurity?
So when Stanton spoke the other day, he said that the priorities 1 through 8 were cybersecurity. I think in healthcare, it's 1 through 18. You cannot have a conversation about anything in healthcare without talking about security. There's been some very public breaches out there that we don't have to go into today, but they're in the public domain, and there's been so many that are beneath the surface that haven't come out. So there was almost unlimited investment in security and how to approach security within your domain. And I would characterize in healthcare that investment in two different ways. One is with large branded service providers that can impress the board level. So we're spending, $50 million with so-and-so, the big brand, board knows it, check the box, everybody gets excited about it. That's great. But there's also a lot of niche providers that are really being brought in kind of beneath the surface to provide unique solutions around security. So a lot of investment in that space.
Wow. And let me ask a question sort of that relates to that. So you talk about, I call it traditional provider healthcare, where people would literally go into an office, and you talk about the security associated with that. Now, I call it from a channel perspective, as we say in consumer services, you have stuff like telehealth. So security and cybersecurity becomes even more important because a lot of this stuff is virtual and remote, right? That has to have huge implications on y'all's industry.
Yeah, absolutely. And telehealth is certainly an emerging trend. It's coming, and it's coming in waves. And to reference something John said earlier, it's probably a positive outgrowth from the pandemic, because telehealth has always been in the industry, at least for the last 5 to 10 years or so. Mm-hmm. But now people are getting used to not going to a healthcare provider and getting that level of service. And when you look at the socioeconomic dynamics in our country, it's going to increase in spades. It's going to increase tons. And our clients are recognizing that value. So certainly there's going to be an underpinning of security, but they're also looking for concepts from other industries on how to make the patient experience akin to a consumer experience.
So let me ask, if I could, and I don't mean to take up all the questions. I know, John, you have a lot of questions as well. So we talked about different channels, right? In person versus telehealth and things like that. The importance of security in all of those channels. One of the other things that's really interesting is we have a whole slew of new entrants that are getting into this space. I mean, who would have thunk a couple of years ago that someone called Amazon would get into home healthcare? Think about that, right?
Yeah, and then I should let Ron talk a little bit too, but I'll take the first cut at this, and then try and bring my partner in. From a provocative perspective, ISG is very bullish on the hyperscalers entering the healthcare market. We're aware of publicly known transactions, like, for example, what Humana is doing with Microsoft, and then there's a lot of beneath the surface activities. Hyperscalers see that the barriers to entry that existed in this market 3 to 5 years ago, those cultural barriers, like you want to see a clinician first, have waned. And they also see a lot of inefficiency in the industry. So we think the hyperscalers are in this for the long term, in it to stay, and in it in ways that you never would have predicted just a couple of years ago. And that wave is coming quickly, 2 to 3 years out from now. Who knows? Your main healthcare provider could be an Amazon.
Yeah.
And the abilities. Go ahead, Ron.
It's more than just what's publicized. I mean, what we're seeing in our study is that these hyperscalers are expanding their partnership ecosystems with the med tech companies, with the service providers who offer capabilities in that space. So it's the background infrastructure and software and all that as well, not just the front end part that you see in the news. And it's also significant because that's what's going to make all this work, right? Is that digital backdrop, that digital foundation. So it's definitely a very important trend from the top down.
Yeah, I think this is something you're bringing up, that if you're listening here on the show and you're a healthcare provider or payer, is if you're not thinking about the competitors differently, you're at threat, right? Because, if you think about Sears, some of us remember Sears, they looked at Amazon as an online bookstore. And it didn't take but a few years to literally put them out of business. And if you think about it from the days back in the 90s, Sears wasn't the catalog version of Amazon, right? You got this 700-page book. So I think payers and providers and the healthcare industry need to think about, is Tesla a competitor in the future? Because it's a battle to the consumer, or in this case, the patient, in data. So are the hyperscalers, is a Tesla, who is the new competition potentially, right?
And it's also household names too. I was going to say, people know the likes of Tesla and Amazon, right? When they may not know the name of the payer or the provider. So it's that I call it that good housekeeping seal of approval, because I feel comfortable with you and your brand type of thing.
Yeah, and I would say that the awakening has occurred. Certainly, even as late as 5 years ago, I saw the CIO of Aetna at the time say her main competition would be in Amazon, and everybody looked like you're crazy. But she was right. She was right, and coming through the pandemic, or wherever we are coming through the pandemic, we'll be out of it someday. But we anticipate that competition will get even more fierce.
Yeah, let's think a little bit too about you mentioned briefly telehealth. Is that that's obviously a top 10 trend, probably maybe a top 5. I saw in the news yesterday, Minnesota Health, in Fairview, they're investing over $600,000 in telehealth. They're getting FCC financing, funding, et cetera. So how is that going to impact the industry and service providers and the opportunity, really?
So a lot of service providers are talking about hospitals without walls now. That's kind of a tagline for one of the service providers, and it's definitely going to be true. So 600K is going to be a drop in a bucket. There's also money set aside, depending upon where things go politically, in the infrastructure bills for investments in this area. So you can see that coming. But lots of companies, including a client of ours called Louisiana Healthcare Group, who's traditionally been in-home services, are starting to look more at telehealth. And think about it, there's a lot of investment to make sure that happens. It all starts with the network underpinning and making sure that you've got reliable, resilient network capability and there's no lag time. And then it moves up into infrastructure and into the apps. Doing it within a data center might be a challenge. You might need to explore cloud capacity and cloud capabilities. And that provides another challenge for healthcare providers, because traditionally they haven't navigated to that space.
So can I ask a question that's a little bit more clinical, and I'm not sure if we all know the answer, but it's a concern out there, and I think, right? So people say telehealth is a great thing for certain things. I know there's guardrails about what really you can use telehealth for, like, a common cold or something like that, but something major you wouldn't use telehealth. But the thought is, for the people, there are some people out there, I won't say that they're naysayers, but they're critical of it, saying, hey, but if you go to the doctor, even if it's for something simple, the doctor, while checking that simple thing, may find the more complex thing that you couldn't find during a telehealth checkup, right?
Well, I think it's not a replacement. It's an addition. I think we need to look at it as additive services. And we also need to look at telehealth not in a vacuum, but in combination with other things. People want to make their appointments online. They want to do other things without having to get on the phone and waiting for somebody to answer and in the office, whatever. I mean, we saw one study showed that telehealth claims for private insurers rose nearly 3,000% in 2020. So, but a lot of that was not through the hospitals; it was through the providers, the doctors' offices, and those folks who really had no other way to get people to get to their patients. So, a lot of the hospitals, actually, the studies are showing, are behind in the telehealth technology that's really needed to meet the demand. So there's a lot of opportunity for the service providers to help fill that gap, bring in their expertise there, bring in their expertise in digital, cybersecurity. Most of these organizations don't have a lot of expertise in cybersecurity. That's brought in. So there's tremendous opportunities. And because of that, we're seeing growth in double digits. The companies we're talking to are telling us they're growing by double digits in the healthcare space in 1 year in terms of the business. So it's definitely ramping up. It's happening, and the service providers are helping grease the skids there.
No, it's cool to know that so it's additive. That also helps too. So another question is we've all heard about this thing that's happening across the globe and in every industry called the Great Resignation, right? People are resigning en masse in the way they've never, ever done in the past. And one of the things that we hear on the news a lot, and I wanted to get y'all's perspective on this, is especially in the healthcare space, because the immense pressure that these folks have been on, the frontline folks especially, right, over the last 18 to 24 months, that there's been mass resignations as well. So I'm assuming there's got to be an incredible focus on retention, employee retention, and the technological enablement of that, and the tools and processes out there to help these guys focus on not just recruitment, but retention. And just wanted to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, there's definitely a talent gap, and the turnover is incredibly high. So there is a lot of focus on the associate or the clinician, making sure that you have a workplace environment that's suitable and competitive with other workplace environments. So the work from anywhere concept is obviously penetrating the industry pretty highly. BYODs, all those kinds of concepts that weren't really core to the industry a couple of years back now are becoming much, much more important.
Yeah, absolutely. We see that in the study too. The service providers are talking about those capabilities that enhance employee interaction, make the jobs easier for those frontline workers who every day, are trying to juggle many things. So it's absolutely part of the picture. It's a change since last year that the digital services to support the workplace are definitely ramping up in the healthcare world.
And if you think about it from a technology lens perspective, we talked about pent-up demand and the necessity to scale. Almost all the providers and payers are realizing that can't be strictly through new hires, that they're going to have to get new capabilities through the service provider community. It's inevitable.
Yeah. Hey, we were down at this sourcing event. Again, it was a huge success. A lot of people, a lot of conversations. One conversation, Bob, you and I had was with Sumit Ganguly, the CEO of Gaz. This is kind of this idea of there's giant providers. You've got Capgemini, Cognizant, Infosys, these amazing providers globally. And then there's really these specialized providers that are kind of focusing in on one area. Tell me, what do you think about like Sumit and the things that they're doing at Gaz? Like, how does that interact with what's happening in healthcare?
Well, Sumit really is a visionary. He understands the market really well, and he recognized something pretty early on, that the market was changing to those, we're going to send you a list of characteristics, 72 long. You've got to check off these lists. And if you win and you're able to give us more headcount for less money, you're going to win the deal. That's evolved out of healthcare. And what provocative firms recognize is it's all about the ecosystem. It's all about building additional players and coming to clients not with cost takeout only, but with a real solution to a problem. And that solution often isn't found within a single entity, but it's found within a new ecosystem that comes in, figures out how to solve that problem, and perhaps equally important, figures out how to measure it in an outcome-based way. So, give me the same amount of, or more heads for less money isn't the question we're getting asked anymore.
Yeah. I always wonder, the challenge of customer experience and cost takeout don't always line up, right? So I checked and I waited for 2 hours for the Star Wars Disney ride 3 weeks ago with my wife. I'm guessing they didn't have cost takeout on that experience since the line was 2 hours long. Hey, Ron, you were going to say something on this area as well.
Yeah, I was just going to add that there's investments at all levels in this space, and Crunchbase did a study looking at how much has been invested so far in kind of the early stage companies, and it's $4.1 billion in 24 super giant health related rounds so far in 2021. So a lot of money is moving into the space on the top and the bottom, and I think that's going to affect how much change we're going to see in the providers and the payer worlds.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I have a question.
So I wanted
too
to
on
ask
this,
another
Ron.
operational. Oh, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I would just ask about this. Goes into Ron's question on kind of where the money's being spent, and cloud. I think is probably in the top 10. The migration to cloud. But the question becomes is like, are providers and payers in healthcare trying to move everything to the cloud? Is it multi-cloud? Is it staying some on the mainframe? I mean, tell us a little bit about what you see in some of your research. And Bob, I'd love your opinion too from the market itself.
Yeah, well, hopefully our research is same as he's seeing in the market. But yeah, absolutely. We're seeing a mix. It's really a mix. It's not this big shift to the cloud. We're seeing evaluation of workloads, what makes sense. There, as mentioned earlier, there's sensitivity around the personal information that we give to healthcare companies and how that's used and shared. So that plays into it, obviously. At the same time, there's interoperability issues between all these entities, as you've all experienced. When things take so long, a lot of times it's because the sharing is so antiquated between these systems. But in the U.S., there are some initiatives and mandates to solve that with interoperability capabilities, and that's another area where the service providers are able to support the clients in getting those mandates met and meeting those, and that provides things like price transparency to us as patients. So when we're going to go to the doctor, we know how much it's going to cost, and it's all the way through when the doctor needs to share information with the insurance company to process a claim. So there's a lot of pieces and parts to it, but we're actually on some deadlines and some mandates now in the U.S. to help shore that up. So we will actually, as consumers of healthcare, be seeing some of the results of a lot of what's going on right now in the background.
Yeah, from a client-facing perspective, I would almost put two lenses on this cloud migration conversation. There's the haves and the have-nots, unfortunately. The top 6 or 7 payers have all embraced cloud-first strategies and are moving at deliberate speed in attaching to the cloud. When we look at the mid-tier Blue Cross Blue Shield, medium-sized companies, we see less penetration, and they're just starting to evolve their strategies. On the provider side, it's more similar to what the mid-tier blues are doing. It's a little bit deliberate. There's some notable exceptions to that, but there's still a lot of concerns on the provider side around security and HIPAA requirements as they move toward the cloud. And I hate the word never. Never's a bad word, but I would almost say it will never be pure public cloud in healthcare. It'll always be some sort of hybrid solution.
And I think lots of industries are saying that and realizing that too, right? It's not this great migration to the cloud. It's how you operate in this hybrid environment, because some of the systems are always going to stay in data centers. And how do you work within that, like you mentioned many times, in the ecosystem? And how do you do it? How do you optimize that, right?
Yeah, and one thing in terms of haves and have-nots on the other end of the spectrum are the patients and members. Not everybody has broadband access. Not everybody has access to all these services. Not everybody has a smartwatch or a wearable or whatever it is. So, and some people may not be able to easily use what's out there. I mean, we're finding behavioral issues in adopting some of the new technologies. Doctors don't want to move from writing prescriptions on papers to writing it on a tablet, for example. We heard one of the service providers telling a story about that. The phones, the smartphones, not everybody has them. Some are still using flip phones. Whatever the case may be, it limits the access. So we have to remember that too. And in terms of the designing of what we're doing and putting out there in the digital world, is that we still have this in the U.S. at least, this issue of equity of access to the technologies needed to make all these great things happen and these improvements happen.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which makes telehealth kind of a double-edged sword, because
exactly
folks that don't have access to devices and stable networks also have trouble getting to a brick-and-mortar hospital too.
Yeah.
So these are problems we have to solve as a society.
So, hey, guys, just as we told you at the very beginning, John and I said this will fly by, and it did. Oh, my goodness.
We're not done, are we?
Yeah.
Wow.
We're coming up on the bottom of the hour.
Thank you both, Bob and Ron, for showing and participating and being part of the show. And definitely, it sounds like we need to have you back in Q1 of 2022 to see how we're going to kick off the year in healthcare and health providers. It's really an exciting space, and looking forward to hearing more.
Love to do it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Bob and Ron.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
John, what do you think? Huh? It's
Great
pretty
stuff. I
exciting
wish
stuff.
we had an hour with these guys. We need more time, right? It's really a hot topic. And, interestingly enough, we're going to stay on this life sciences healthcare topic for next week. So we're doing a little bit differently than we normally do. We're not going to have a show in 2 weeks. We're having a show next week. And we're going to have the Novartis VP of Testing and Quality on with us. And so we're very excited about this. And for everybody that knows, Novartis is a huge Swiss pharmaceutical company. Everybody knows who they are. And it'll be interesting to hear that perspective within the life sciences, health sciences set of verticals as well.
Wow, definitely. Testing obviously is got to be a critical thing in healthcare. So I'm looking forward to kind of hearing more about that from an experiential perspective, from a digital as well as everything else that they're dealing with. So that should be a very lively conversation, really interesting. Looking forward to it, John. That's going to be great.
I think so too. And hey, it was great seeing you in Dallas this week. For those that don't know, John, I haven't seen each other live in a very long time. So it was good to get back to live events this week in Dallas.
Yeah, it was 18 months, John. You look great. It was great seeing you, and looking forward to our next week's show. And until then, be good and be safe.
You too. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.